how can you start saving money or saving more money per month?
Good question. So the first part really is all around as maybe as dull as it sounds, but this is the fundamental part of anything that you see is people spend more than they earn, right? So that's the first point. So you need to get clear on basically your budget. I prefer the phrase spending plan because spending plan sounds less restrictive, right? But you need to get clear on what's coming in versus what's going out. So the best way that I think about doing that is take your pay slip from work, all right? You'll see the net pay, so take that figure because that is net of tax, national insurance, student loans, pension contributions from if you're employed. So take that figure and then look at your bank account, okay, and look at what you're spending each month. Now, there's loads of good tools now that can tell you and compartmentalize, okay, where you're spending, what you're spending it on. But the easiest way I think of doing this is to list out all of your expenses and list them into debt management, right? So debt management being if you own a property and you're paying a mortgage, if you have some personal loans that you're repaying potentially. The second part is look at, okay, separating out into bills. So what's the non-negotiables, the essentials that if something were to happen, you have to still pay because they're contract-based, your phone maybe, gas, electricity, rent, whatever that may be. And then the third column you look at is then, okay, savings. That might be empty for some people at the moment, it might not be, and just note down what those are. So split your expenditure into those sort of three sections, all right? And then what you'll be able to see is with the money that you get in, okay, how much of that is allocated to debt, how much of that is allocated to bills, and how much is allocated to spending, so saving, all right? And this is the most important part, I think, is to have two bank accounts, right? So everyone will probably have one because they get paid into a bank account. And the second one they may need to set up. The ones I personally think are great for this because it looks even more in depth about where you're spending is using the challenger bank. So use Monzo, Starling, Revolut, something like that. Keep your main bank account, keep all of the money that you've allocated out to debt repayment and bills, and then move the remainder over to your new bank account, all right, which is therefore you're spending money or saving money. That way you've got a clear distinction between what you can have the free money for, you're spending money, versus, okay, what actually needs to come out.
But then how do you, okay, so that's good. You've got clear on sort of the non-negotiables. Hopefully you can review the bills, things like your Netflix, that sort of stuff. There's probably some cutbacks for most people. It's actually impressive once you take the time to go through your bank statements, both in business and in personal. Even in business, sometimes it's even worse because when you're running a business, you kind of feel like the money's a little bit different. Like 20 quid a month's kind of nothing in a business, or most businesses, you know. And before you know it, you can have a shitload of direct debits going out for nonsense that if you actually go through.
Yeah, agreed. And
you don't do this normally, you can go 6 months without looking at your statements. I know I was guilty of it. Now I make sure to go through more regularly and just cut things out, cut things out. I was paying like, my phone bill was my second phone was like £20 a month, SIM only, like my work phone. I remember then it got to it was £45 a month I'd been paying for a year, and because it had been a year, they said, "Oh, it's tough, we can't do anything." So I just wasted 250 quid to vote for it. It's a joke.
Though, this happens, right? I'll give you a real life example. It's a little bit warped because of who this person is, right? But we do this for every client that we work with on the initial phase, right? Which is how much are you actually spending? Where is that being allocated? Because you're exactly right. You probably should do a spring clean of your expenditure once a quarter just to check that things are happening. And I'm not saying here, look at it and be super restrictive, but look at the things and actually be harsh on, okay, what am I using and what am I not using? Yeah. We had a client once who we went through the expenditure with because they, again, never looked at it, just got hung up on it. And we were like, well, what's this payment here to BMW? He was like, I don't know. I was like, well, you must do something. He was like, well, I said, it was obviously for a car. So we looked at the finance, we looked at it, and it was for a car. But what had happened was he'd gone into BMW and he'd never even had the car, but they saw that he was a young guy doing well. And they said that he signed a basic agreement, which he believed was for basically a test session, and they ended up setting him up on a car finance.
No way.
Yeah, and he never noticed because he was earning very well, and he'd just never done a spring clean. Yeah. And I know that's a very warped example, but it's still relative to that person at that time. Yeah. So even on that point, some sleazy car salesman signed him up to 1,200 quid a month.
It's so bad, but that's why it's important to do, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so now you've got your money into the other account, but you want a different, whatever the word is, between, we don't judge words here, I'm no good with my words, so between your savings and your spending, you don't want that in the same pot, surely. How do you split that then?
So what you would want to do initially, first of all, is you'd want to look at, there's some other rules as well, right? So you've got a 50-30-20 rule potentially as well, if you want to look at it, if you want to break it down even further. So 50% of your net income goes on your essential expenditure.
Yeah.
30% goes on spending, living life, and then 20% goes on savings. You need to, essentially the best way to save, invest, whatever it is to automate at the start of the month, right? So potentially when we take it one step back to those two bank accounts, on your main bank account, allocate out from that proportion what you want to put into savings. So whether that be £200 a month, £100 a month, £50 a month, £400 a month, whatever is relative for you, and get that to come out of this bank account, and then move the spending money over into the second bank account. But typically you can look at, I would say budget to zero. So what I mean by that is don't leave any pound unturned. If you know what's coming in, make sure you've allocated it all out. And even by allocating it all out, I mean spend it as well. Because if you're doing that, it means you should have taken the fundamental part of planning out what's your debt repayments, what's your bills, what's your savings, and then what's your spending.
And so with with the 50-30-20 rule, then how do you look at, or when's the right time to start investing? So savings, the first part.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I still think even once you get to the stage of wanting to invest, it's important to save.
Yeah.
How do you then decide when you're ready to start investing? Because there's no point investing. Well, I don't know. What's your opinion? In my opinion, there's no point investing until you've got like 10k to your name, sort of thing. But yeah, what's your thoughts on that? And how do you know when's the right time to start?
Yeah, no, good question. There's a couple. It's important to probably distinguish between what is saving and what is investing. Saving is essentially building cash, right? So cash to sit in the bank, which is there to cover you for a specific purpose, which is either an emergency fund, that if you lose your job, you have a period of time where you can still cover all of those essential expenditures.
What's the time frame you want for that?
So typically what you want for an emergency fund, we say, is 3 to 6 months as a minimum. I probably wouldn't get so hung up on that specific figure. To your point, maybe set a target of what you think that is going to be, but a rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of your basic expenditure. So that is your mortgage, that's your rent, that's your bills. So anything that is contracted and you can't get out of.
Mm-hmm.
Investing is accumulating assets, right? So when we say assets, we mean property, we mean stocks and shares, companies of the world, potentially bonds, okay, which we'll touch on. Anything crypto, if we're going to talk about potential assets, all right? And that is what investing is. Anything that's going to produce a level of return above inflation, all right? Mm-hmm. Now, inflation is just the cost of things getting more expensive over time. We've probably all felt that over the last year or so, all right? So it's just important to distinguish between what saving is and what investing is. And in answer to your question about when it becomes a good time, once you've got that emergency fund, or if have got any big one-off expenditures in the next 12 months, so whether that is you're maybe looking to buy a house, maybe it's a second property, maybe you've got a wedding you're saving for, that needs to be sat in cash as well. But once you've covered that, that's when we should start to look at investing.
And so if you're investing, what's the rule of thumb around how long should you not need to touch that money? So yes, you've got your emergency fund, but life is life, and sometimes you might need access to the rest of your cash. So how long should you be willing to part ways with your money if you're going to invest?
If you're going to invest, you'd probably say, as a rule of thumb, a minimum needs to be 5 years, but ideally the goal is to never get rid of this stuff. When I say never get rid of it, I mean never deplete it to zero. Mm-hmm. All right. Of course, at some point in the future, if you're going to give up work, if you're going to stop and do something else, you're going to need to draw on it. But the goal is that really you should probably never want to deplete them in assets entirely. But as a minimum, you should be trying to look at tying it away for 5 years. Have that view on it, which is a relatively short amount of time.
But to people that this is maybe a new concept, why do you not want to, like, surely if I'm now in my 20s and you're telling me I can't go on that extra holiday year, I can't go on that night out, you're telling me to not buy champagne at the club, to put into an investment that you say, yes, it's going up, but then to never take it back all out, what's the point?
Never take it back all out. And what I mean by that is that the goal of it is obviously to provide you a lifestyle in the future, right? What I mean is, if you're going to run out of money, right, it doesn't matter. If you're going to run out of money, it doesn't really matter what you're doing now, right, because you're not going to be able to fund it in the future, right? So we just want to make sure that the amount we're drawing out is less than what we're getting on that return on that money, right? So in answer to your question, what am I saying to people that are potentially telling them not to go on that holiday, not to do this. This is why you allocate this stuff out, right? It's why we talk about budgeting, why we talk about planning, building a spending plan, right? Because you need to be forward thinking with your budgeting. So actually, I do want to go on that holiday. What we're sitting here saying is, I don't think you should just save and never live your life. It's plan for today, all right, but tomorrow probably is going to come, all right, so enjoy it, but we need to have one eye on the future, because you don't want to be the person that has to potentially work longer. You don't necessarily want to be the person that doesn't maybe get a house if that's what you want to do. So it's just being intentional with why you're saving, but also intentional with your spending as well.